For 3 years, I sent my in-laws $1,200 every month. Rent, groceries, prescriptions. I told myself it was family. Then my wife's phone lit up on the kitchen counter. Don't worry. He'll keep paying. A second message followed. Once we're done with him, you'll come back home. That's when I understood I wasn't a husband to them. I was a plan. Let me rewind. Merrick Novak had always believed in two kinds of strength. The kind you could measure with a tool belt and the kind you could measure with restraint. He was Polish-American, born and raised in Chicago, the kind of city that taught you early that talk was cheap and effort was currency. His father had driven trucks until his knuckles looked permanently swollen from gripping the wheel. His mother had cleaned offices after hours, the kind of work that made her hands smell faintly of lemon disinfectant even when she sat down to dinner. Merrick grew up watching them do quiet, ordinary miracles. Bills paid on time, food on the table, shoes that fit, heat in the winter. And if somebody in the family stumbled, everybody else reached out a hand without keeping score. That was what family meant, not sentiment, not speeches. Annette. By 33, Merrick had turned that lesson into a life. He was a union electrician, licensed, steady, respected, the guy they called when a job had to be done cleanly the first time. He liked the certainty of his work, a wire routed correctly, a panel labeled properly, a circuit that behaved exactly as it should. He liked knowing that if you followed the rules and kept your head, the lights came on. He liked the way a job site felt at 6 in the morning, cold air biting the back of your throat, the first clank of metal, the first crackle of radios, men and women moving like a single machine warming up. He liked the satisfaction of walking away at the end of the day and knowing that something dangerous had been made safe, something chaotic made orderly. What he didn't like, what he had never been good at, was the kind of danger you couldn't see coming. The kind that wore perfume and smiled across a dinner table. He met Joanna Kowalska at a Polish festival in Jefferson Park. One of those summer days when the air smelled like grilled kielbasa and fried onions and spilled beer, when someone's kid was always crying and someone's uncle was always laughing too loud. Merrick had been helping a buddy rig stage lights for the folk dancing, because electrical guys always ended up doing favors for someone. And Joanna, Asia to her friends, was volunteering at a pierogi tent. She had dark hair pulled back, a face that looked like it had been carved out of stubbornness, and a laugh that seemed to happen in her chest first, like she couldn't stop it even if she wanted to. Merrick made a dumb joke about his Polish being better when he was hungry, and she teased him for saying "sesasy" like he was choking on it. When she corrected him, she leaned closer, and for a second her fingers brushed his wrist. It was nothing. It was everything. They dated for 2 years. It was easy at first. They went to late-night diners after his jobs, sharing fries and talking about everything and nothing. She told him about her family, how close they were, how her parents had sacrificed when they immigrated, how their little house had always been full of cousins and noise and opinions. Merrick liked that. He liked being folded into a loud room, being offered food before he'd even taken his shoes off. He liked her mother's insistence that he eat more, her father's heavy handshake, the way their Polish accents thickened when they talked about old stories. He liked the feeling of belonging, because no matter how grown you are, some part of you still wants to be claimed. When Merrick proposed, it was with shaking hands he tried to hide by putting them in his pockets. Asia said yes immediately, like she'd been waiting for him to stop being cautious. They got married in her parish church with gold trim and incense, and a priest who talked about patience like it was the only thing that mattered. Her mother, Helena, cried openly. Her father, Stanislav Stasik, blinked hard and stared at the ceiling like he was refusing to be emotional on principle. Marek's aunts cried louder than everyone. Somebody sang off-key at the reception. Someone else insisted on a second toast. Merrick and Asia danced until their feet hurt and then drove home with the windows cracked, laughing like teenagers. For a while, it felt like a life that would keep making sense. The first crack appeared as a phone call. Helena called Asia on a Tuesday afternoon while Merrick was at work. By the time he got home, Asia was sitting on the edge of their couch with her legs tucked under her and her eyes red. She tried to smile like she hadn't been crying. Merrick, who could read a room like a blueprint, knew that look. He sat down carefully, as if moving too fast might make her fall apart. What happened? He asked. Asia swallowed. My dad's back, she said. It's worse. He can't take extra shifts at the warehouse anymore. And my mom, her hours got cut. They're behind on some things. On what things? Merrick asked, already reaching for his phone in his head, already thinking about numbers. Asia's voice got smaller. Rent, she said. Groceries. Medications. They're scared, Merrick. Merrick hadn't met Stasik's back before. Stasik loved talking about his back. He mentioned it like it was a badge, like it proved he'd worked harder than anyone else. Merrick had seen him move heavy objects without much trouble at family gatherings. He'd seen him stand for hours at the grill. But pain was weird. Pride was weirder. Merrick didn't want to assume anything about someone else's body. He just wanted Asia not to be scared. How much? He asked. Asia hesitated, then said, 2,000. No, wait. She corrected herself quickly, maybe too quickly. Actually, it's about 1,200 a month, just to stabilize them, just until they get caught up. Merrick blinked. 1,200 wasn't nothing, but it was doable. It was a chunk of money, the kind that meant fewer dinners out and fewer extras, the kind that meant Merrick might pick up an extra call here and there. But it was not a catastrophe. It was something a family could handle if they were careful. It sounded like a bridge. How long? He asked. Just a couple months, Asia promised. Please. They've done so much, and I can't stand the thought of them struggling. Merrick had been raised to feel physical discomfort at the idea of family suffering while you had the means to help. It wasn't guilt exactly, it was instinct, like seeing a toddler wander toward a busy street. You didn't debate. You moved. All right, he said. We'll help. Asia exhaled like she'd been holding her breath since the phone call. She hugged him hard, too hard, like she was afraid he might change his mind. Merrick hugged back and felt the warm satisfaction of being the steady one. He told himself it was what love looked like in real life. Not flowers, not speeches, just showing up when it mattered. The first transfer left their account 2 days later. Merrick labeled it in his banking app, Family Support. Asia said she'd handle talking to her parents. Merrick didn't ask for receipts, didn't ask for proof. He trusted his wife. He trusted the story. He trusted the family. A month later, Helena called again. This time she didn't sound scared. She sounded offended, like the universe was personally insulting her. The rent went up, she told Asia, loud enough that Merrick heard pieces of it from the kitchen while he washed dishes. And the landlord is saying, yes, yes, I know, but it's not our fault. Everything costs more. And your father's medication, they say it's not covered. Can you believe? Asia murmured reassurances, switching between English and Polish in that soothing voice she used when she wanted to calm someone down. After she hung up, she came into the kitchen with a practiced look of worry. They need a little more, she said. Merrick turned off the water, wiped his hands on a towel. How much more? Asia avoided his eyes for half a second. Not more, exactly, she said quickly. Just the same. For another month. Maybe 2. Merrick felt his jaw tighten, not at Asia, but the situation. He wanted to fix things the way he fixed wires. Diagnose, repair, move on. But money problems didn't always behave like circuits. They were messy, full of human factors. Pride, fear, bad choices, bad luck. All right, he said again, and heard something in his own voice that sounded like a sigh. It didn't stop after 2 months. Or 4. Or 6. The 1,200 became a rhythm. It left their account like rent, like a second mortgage they hadn't agreed to sign. Every month, Merrick would see it and feel that tiny pinch of irritation, then immediately suppress it because the alternative was Asia crying, and Merrick hated that more than he hated being annoyed. He would tell himself it wasn't forever. He would tell himself that Stasik's back would improve, that Helena would find more hours, that the universe would stop charging extra for being alive. And then, slowly, the tone shifted. Helena stopped asking like it was help. She started saying it like it was owed. Merrick, she would say on the phone, voice bright and commanding. The electric bill is high this month. Prices are crazy. Make sure the transfer doesn't come late, okay? Merrick, she would say later, the pharmacy says there's a new copay. It's not much, but it's annoying. We're old. We shouldn't have to worry about this. Sometimes she would call Asia, and Asia would put on speaker while she cooked, as if Helena's complaints were just background noise. Merrick would listen and feel his shoulders climb up toward his ears. One night, when Helena was complaining about a problem with their internet bill, Merrick glanced at Asia and said, quietly, "Why are we paying for internet?" Asia's knife paused mid-chop. Her expression tightened just slightly. "Because my dad needs it," she said. "He can't. He needs to keep track of appointments. And my mom uses it for work stuff." "What work stuff?" Merrick asked before he could stop himself. Asia's eyes flashed. "Merrick," she said in a warning tone, "don't start. They're stressed. Don't make it worse." That was the first time Merrick felt something inside him recoil. Not because he wanted to fight, because he didn't recognize that tone in his wife. It sounded like loyalty pointed in the wrong direction. He shut his mouth and went back to eating. Over the next year, he worked more. If overtime was available, he took it. If someone needed an emergency job on a weekend, he said yes. He drove rideshare late nights when work slowed, telling himself it was temporary, telling himself he was building a cushion. The 1200 was manageable, but it changed the shape of their life. It turned their budget into a tightrope. It turned every surprise expense into a new problem. It turned Merrick into someone who thought about money in the shower, in the car, lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling while Asia slept. And the strangest part was that Helena and Stasek never said thank you. Not once. Not even in a casual way. Not even as a reflex. They accepted the money like it was water, like the faucet existed for them by default. When Merrick and Asia visited them, Helena would pile food on a Marek's plate and then immediately mention bills. She'd serve him stuffed cabbage with one hand and guilt with the other. "You work so hard," she'd say, patting his cheek like he was a child. "You're a good provider." Merrick began to hate that phrase. Good provider. It didn't feel like praise. It felt like a function, like calling him a refrigerator because he kept things cold. Stasek would sit in his chair and groan, one hand pressed to his lower back, and say, Merrick, you know how it is. We tried. We worked. But America is not kind to old people." Then he'd shift his weight and reach for another piece of cake with suspicious ease. Merrick, who spent his days around people who didn't have the energy to perform, noticed the inconsistencies. He noticed that Stasek could stand to argue with a neighbor about a parking spot for 15 minutes without grimacing. He noticed Helena's nails were always freshly done. He noticed the new television in the living room. He noticed the way Helena's pantry was full, not of cheap staples, but of fancy imported things that cost too much for someone supposedly struggling. He asked Asia once, carefully, like a man stepping onto a floor he wasn't sure would hold. "Are you sure they're really in trouble?" he said. Asia's face closed off like a door. "Merrick," she said, "don't be that person." "What person?" he asked. "The kind who counts pennies when family is suffering." Asia snapped, and then immediately looked like she regretted the sharpness. She softened her voice. "They're proud. They don't want to ask. It hurts them. Please don't make it harder." Merrick didn't want to be that person. He didn't want to be suspicious. He didn't want to become the kind of man who treated his own marriage like a courtroom. So he stopped asking. The third year was the year Asia started talking about her promotion. She worked in operations for a mid-sized logistics company, the kind that moved freight and handled contracts and cared deeply about compliance and reimbursements and paperwork. She was good at it. She had a brain that could hold multiple timelines at once. She could look at a messy problem and find the pattern. Merrick admired that about her. He admired her ambition. He liked that she wanted more, that she didn't shrink herself. "They're going to make a decision in a few months," she told him one night, excited. "If it happens, it's a big jump. Better pay, better title. We'll finally breathe." Merrick smiled and kissed her forehead. "You'll get it," he said. He meant it. He didn't know what "will finally breathe" meant in her mouth. In the months before that message, small things had started to feel off. Expense receipts Asia asked me to file, reimbursements that hit our account, even on weeks she never traveled. When I asked, she called it paperwork and changed the subject. I let it go because believing was easier. The text message that cracked everything open happened on an ordinary Tuesday in February. Exactly the kind of night that didn't feel like a turning point until you realized later it was the moment your life split into before and after. Merrick was at the kitchen table with a stack of receipts, sorting them into piles for taxes, because grown-up life was full of small paperwork battles. Asia was in the shower, humming softly, water running, steam turning the bathroom mirror into fog. The apartment smelled faintly of detergent and garlic from dinner. It was peaceful in that tired, end-of-day way. Asia's phone buzzed on the counter. Merrick glanced at it without thinking. He wasn't a snooper. He had never been. He believed privacy was respect. But the screen lit up with a preview. Helena, don't worry. He'll keep paying. Marek's fingers froze on a receipt. Another buzz. Helena, once we're done with him, you'll come back home. For a second, Marek's brain refused to interpret the words. It was like reading a sentence in the wrong language. His mind tried to translate it into something harmless. A joke. A weird expression. Helena being dramatic. Something taken out of context. Then another message popped up, and the context arrived like a slap. Asia, just keep him calm until my promotion. Merrick looked at the phone as if it might rearrange itself into something less ugly. The shower turned off. Asia's humming stopped. Merrick heard the squeak of the faucet handle. He had maybe 10 seconds before she walked out and saw his face. His hands moved before he could decide if he wanted them to. He picked up her phone. He unlocked it. He had never known her passcode. Not formally, but he'd seen her type it 1,000 times without thinking. His fingers entered it with a sick kind of ease, like muscle memory for a betrayal. The messages opened. There was a thread labeled family. It wasn't a casual family chat full of recipes and holiday photos. It was a planning room. Merrick scrolled and felt the blood drain from his face. Helena, he's so predictable. Praise him and he melts. Stasek, as long as he pays, who cares what he thinks? Asia, don't push too hard before the promotion. I need him stable. Helena, a wallet with a pulse. Asia, exactly. He just wants to feel needed. There were laughing emojis. There were smug little comments. There were references to Marek's overtime, his schedule, his exhaustion. They talked about him like he wasn't a person, like he was a resource. Helena, if he ever starts asking questions, cry. Say you're scared. He hates that. Asia, I know. He can't handle me upset. He'll cave. Marek's throat went tight. Not because he was about to cry, because his body was preparing for something else. Something colder. He scrolled further and found a sentence that made everything in him go still. Asia, after the promotion, I'll handle the divorce. He'll be devastated, but he'll survive. And we'll be okay. Helena, good. Then you can come back here where you belong. Stasek, finally. I'm tired of pretending we like him. Marek's ears rang. His hands didn't shake. His breathing stayed controlled. The way you breathe when you're lifting something heavy and you don't want to hurt your back. He felt like he was watching himself from a distance, like he'd stepped outside his own body because it was the only way to stay upright. The bathroom door opened. Asia walked out with wet hair wrapped in a towel, cheeks flushed from the heat, and gave Merrick a quick smile. Hey, she said softly. You want tea? Merrick set the phone down exactly where it had been, screen dark, as if nothing had happened. Yes, he said. His voice sounded normal. That was the terrifying part. It sounded like he believed the life they'd been living. Asia padded into the kitchen, opened the cabinet, and started rattling around for mugs. Merrick studied the receipts in front of him, the neat little piles of proof that he had been the one carrying weight, and felt a strange calm settle over him. It was not peace. It was clarity. In his work, when something failed, you didn't scream at the circuit. You didn't argue with the breaker. You didn't demand the wire behave out of love. You assessed the failure. You isolated the issue. You removed the hazard, and you rebuilt safely. This marriage had failed. Not in a dramatic, messy way. In a structural way. The supports were rotten. The trust was a lie. And if Merrick stayed, he would keep feeding electricity into a system that was designed to burn him. Asia handed him a mug. Her fingers brushed his. Merrick forced himself not to flinch. Long day? She asked. Yeah, he said. She kissed his temple. You're amazing, she whispered. Merrick felt his stomach twist, but he kept his face neutral. He nodded, like a man accepting a compliment. That night, he lay in bed next to her and listened to her breathing slow into sleep. Merrick lay awake with his eyes on the ceiling until they ached. His mind replayed the messages over and over, not because he enjoyed pain, but because he needed the reality to stick. He needed it to anchor him so he didn't drift back into denial. By morning, he had made a decision. Not to confront, not to yell, not to throw her phone at the wall and demand explanations. He would do quiet work, because people like Helena didn't fear anger. Anger was something they could spin, something they could weaponize. He's unstable, Helena would say. He's abusive, she'd imply. We were scared, Asia would cry, and the truth would get drowned in performance. Merrick would not give them a performance. He would give them paper. For 2 weeks, he acted exactly the same. That was the hardest part. It wasn't the rage. It wasn't the heartbreak. It was the acting. He kissed Asia goodbye. He went to work. He sent the 1200. He answered Helena politely when she called to complain about some new expense. He nodded while Stasek groaned theatrically. He smiled at family dinners and let Helena put extra food on his plate while she talked about how hard life was. Inside, he started building a file. The first person he called was not his friends, not his mother, not his union buddies who would have shown up with baseball bats and righteous fury. Merrick loved them for that instinct, but it wasn't what he needed. He needed someone who understood procedure. He found a lawyer named Marianne Zielinska, Polish-American, mid-40s, sharp jawline, small cross necklace, the kind of woman who looked like she'd been underestimated her whole life and had turned that into a profession. Her office was neat and quiet, the air smelling faintly of coffee and printer paper. Merrick sat across from her and spoke carefully, like every word was a wire he had to place correctly. "I've been paying my in-laws $1,200 a month," he said, "for 3 years. I found messages. My wife and her parents planned it. They're planning to leave me after her promotion." Marian didn't gasp. She didn't widen her eyes. She didn't offer pity as a substitute for competence. She just held out her hand. "Show me," she said. Merrick slid his phone across the desk with screenshots already organized in an album. Marian scrolled. Her face didn't change much, but her eyes sharpened. "They wrote it down," she murmured. "Yes," Merrick said. Marian handed the phone back. "Good," she said. Merrick blinked. "Good. Good for you," Marian clarified. "Bad for them. People who do this usually aren't smart enough to leave proof. Yours were confident." She leaned back. "We handle this clean. No threats. No emotional explosions. Facts. Documentation. Strategy." Merrick felt the tightness in his chest ease by a fraction. "What do I do?" he asked. Marianne folded her hands. "First, we protect you," she said. "Second, we gather everything. Third, we choose timing. Fourth, we let consequences do what they're going to do." Merrick nodded. This sounded like work. This sounded like a plan. Marianne referred him to a forensic accountant named Tomasz Vrobel. Tomasz met Merrick at a small office near downtown, the kind of place with cheap carpet and expensive printers. Tomasz looked like he hadn't smiled since 1998. Merrick liked him immediately. Tomasz asked for bank statements, transfer records, any emails about the payments, any text messages from Helena or Stasek referencing money. Merrick gave him everything he had. He pulled statements dating back 3 years, highlighting each $1,200 transfer and labeling it. He downloaded receipts for groceries he'd bought when Helena insisted, "We're out of everything." He pulled the medical bills Asia had shown him, the ones that looked official but were always conveniently vague. Tomasz built spreadsheets like weapons. He created timelines. He calculated totals. He tagged patterns. 43,200, Tomasz said one afternoon, tapping a number on the page. "That's how much you've transferred directly, not including the groceries and incidentals." Mark's stomach clenched. He had known it was a lot, but hearing the total said out loud made it real in a way his tired brain had never fully allowed. Tomasz looked at him. "You want to know where it went?" he asked. "Yes," Merrick said, and his voice came out flat. Tomasz nodded. "Then we trace," he said. "We look for inconsistencies. Anyone can be struggling in a story. In bank records, people either have money or they don't." For the next week, Merrick lived 2 lives. In one, he was a husband, making dinner, talking about Asia's day, listening as she worried about her promotion, nodding supportively, playing the role of a man who trusted his marriage. In the other, he was an investigator, forwarding documents to Tomasz, meeting Marianne, taking notes, checking public records late at night while Asia slept beside him. It started with something small. Merrick searched county property records out of a desperate curiosity and found a listing under Stanislav Kowalski's name. It wasn't their primary home. It was a two-flat on the northwest side, a brick building with tenants. Merrick kept his eyes on the screen for a long time. He could feel the heat rise in his neck. Not quite anger, not quite disbelief. It was the sensation of watching a magician pull back a curtain and seeing the trapdoor. He sent the link to Tomasz. Tomasz responded with one line, "Now we're getting somewhere." They dug deeper. Helena had insisted she wasn't working, that her hours were cut, that she could barely manage. But Tomasz found deposits, cash deposits, regular and oddly consistent. Merrick remembered the photos Helena posted online. Trays of pierogi, catering setups for church events, proud captions about helping the community. Helping the community, it turned out, was a business. Under-the-table income while collecting benefits. Unreported earnings. It was messy in the way only greedy people were messy, the kind who thought they were too clever to get caught. Merrick sat at the kitchen table one night, laptop open, scrolling through Helena's social media posts with a numb expression while Asia folded laundry and chatted about a coworker. Helena was smiling in photos next to huge spreads of food. Helena posed with customers. Helena held envelopes in one picture, joking about tips. Helena's nails were always perfect. Helena was always wearing new earrings. Merrick felt like he was watching a stranger's life. Tomasz compiled it all. Property records, deposit patterns, discrepancies between reported income and observed lifestyle. He didn't accuse. He annotated. He built a narrative out of facts, which was far more dangerous than any insult. Marianne, meanwhile, guided Merrick on protecting his finances. She told him to open a separate account in his name only for his paycheck. She told him to stop putting extra money into any joint savings without documenting it. She told him to record everything he could without making it obvious. Also, Marianne said, "You need a moment, a trigger, something that makes your next steps look reasonable even to a stranger." Merrick frowned. "You mean like an excuse?" "Not an excuse," Marianne corrected. "A catalyst. People understand catalysts. They don't understand slow betrayal. If you confront them now, they'll spin it. If you wait until they push too far, no one will be able to say you overreacted. You want your timing to be defensible." Merrick understood. He didn't like it, but he understood. And the catalyst arrived on his birthday. It started with Helena's cheerful promise 2 weeks earlier. "We're coming Sunday," she said. "We'll bring cake. We'll celebrate you, Merrick. You're our son now." Merrick had almost laughed at the irony, but he kept his voice polite. "Okay," he said. "That's nice." Asia seemed excited too. She talked about what they should cook, what kind of candles to buy, how her parents would be so proud of him. She acted like nothing was wrong, like the messages hadn't existed, like Merrick hadn't read the words "wallet with a pulse." Merrick watched her and wondered, in quiet horror, how easily she could inhabit this performance. On Sunday, Merrick cleaned the apartment. He cooked bigos because Stasek always claimed it was his favorite. He made a tray of baked potatoes because Helena liked to pretend she ate light, then always went back for seconds. He set the table with decent plates, not paper ones. He even bought a small cake because he didn't trust Helena to bring anything and he didn't want to spend the day waiting for something that might not arrive. At 3 p.m., Helena texted, "Running late." At 4, "Car trouble." At 5, nothing. Asia checked her phone repeatedly and shrugged, smiling too brightly. "They'll come," she said. "You know them." Merrick kept his face neutral. His chest felt like it was filled with heavy sand. At 6, he called Helena. No answer. At 6:15, Helena called back with a voice that sounded almost amused. "Oh, Merrick," she said, as if she'd forgotten. "We can't make it. Something came up." Merrick looked at the food on the table. The steaming pot, the plates, the small cake waiting like an idiot. "What came up?" he asked. Helena sighed theatrically. "You're taking this too personally," she said. "It's just a birthday." "It's not about the birthday," Merrick said. and surprised himself with how steady he sounded. It's about showing up. Helena laughed, small and dismissive. Merrick, she said, don't be dramatic. Asia stood near the kitchen doorway, silent, watching Merrick with eyes that looked too calm. Merrick tightened his grip on the phone. Why? He asked quietly. After everything, why couldn't you show up? There was a pause, and Merrick realized Helena was deciding whether to keep pretending. Something in her must have snapped or grown bored. You want the truth? Helena said, and her voice sharpened. Fine. The truth is you're not part of our family. You never were. Mark's heart didn't race. It dropped, heavy, like a tool falling from a ladder. Helena continued, words spilling out with the cruel ease of someone who'd rehearsed them. You're convenient, she said. A solution. Asia needed someone stable. We needed help. You were helpful. Merrick faced forward, expression still. The apartment felt suddenly too quiet, as if the world was holding its breath. You mean nothing to us, Helena finished, and there was satisfaction in her tone, as if she'd won something. Merrick heard himself inhale once, slow. He thought about all the nights he'd driven tired, all the weekends he'd worked, all the moments he'd told himself love was sacrifice. He thought about the spreadsheets Tomasz had shown him. He thought about the messages on Asia's phone. He also thought about Marianne's word, catalyst. Okay, Merrick said. Helena made a small sound, surprised. Excuse me. Okay, Merrick repeated, calm. Thank you for being honest. Then he hung up. Asia took a step forward, her face changing slightly as if she expected tears and didn't know what to do with calm. Merrick, she began. He lifted a hand, not aggressively, just as a boundary. Not right now, he said. He walked into the bedroom, opened the drawer where he'd hidden the folder Marianne called the brick, and pulled out his laptop. His hands still didn't shake. He wasn't numb, exactly. He was focused, the way he was when electricity was live and one mistake could hurt you. He opened the draft email Marianne had helped him prepare. It was already addressed. It already had attachments queued. Screenshots, bank statements, property records, Tomasz's annotated summary. It was one email, but it felt like pulling a pin. Behind him, Asia whispered, What are you doing? Merrick didn't look at her. I'm stopping, he said. Stopping what? Merrick finally turned his head enough to meet her eyes. I'm stopping being your solution, he said softly. Asia's face tightened with fear, quick and ugly. Merrick, wait, she said, stepping toward him. He shook his head once. No, he said. You've had 3 years of wait. Then he clicked send, and somewhere beyond the walls of the apartment, the machinery of consequences began to wake up. The click of the send button was almost disappointingly small, like the world should have made a louder noise when Merrick Novak finally stopped holding everyone else up. He expected thunder, maybe, or the kind of cinematic silence that comes before a crash. But what he got was the faint hum of his laptop fan and the distant sound of traffic outside their building. Chicago doing what it always did, moving on without asking permission. Asia stood behind him in the bedroom doorway with her towel still twisted around her hair, her face caught between disbelief and calculation. And for one strange second, Merrick saw her the way you see a stranger in a crowd, as if you'd been looking at the wrong person for years, and suddenly the light changed. Merrick, she said again, softer now, the way people speak when they're trying to press a bruise instead of a wound. What did you do? He turned the laptop screen so she could see the sent message line. Not the attachments, not the details, just the proof that something had already left his hands and entered the world. I told the truth, he said. Asia's eyes flicked over the screen, then up to his face, and the fear that surfaced wasn't about him. Not really, it was about the loss of control. You can't, she whispered. You don't understand what you just did. Merrick felt something inside him settle. Not satisfaction, not joy, just a grim steadiness. I understand exactly what I did, he said. I stopped being useful. Asia swallowed, and then her expression shifted, as if she'd flipped through a set of masks and decided which one fit the moment best. Tears gathered fast, almost too fast. You're going to ruin my parents, she said, voice trembling. They're old. They're sick. They need help. Merrick looked at her, and the absurdity hit him so hard it almost made him laugh. You wrote that I was a wallet with a pulse, he said quietly. You laughed at it. Asia's tears spilled over. That wasn't me, she insisted. That was my mom. That was her words. Mark's gaze didn't move. You replied exactly, Asia. Her mouth opened, closed, open again. She took a step into the room like she could physically close the distance and make the last 3 years disappear. It was complicated, she said. And there it was, that word people use when they've done something simple and cruel and want it to sound like a tragedy. It wasn't complicated, Merrick said. It was a plan. Asia's shoulders shook. I didn't want to leave you, she said quickly. I was angry when I said things. I was venting. They were pressuring me. You don't know what it's like with my parents. Merrick heard the old instinct in himself, the part trained to soothe, to fix, to understand, to be the net, and he watched it rise like a reflex. Then he remembered Helena's message, cold and clean. Praise him, and he melts. He felt the reflex die in his throat. I do know, he said. I know exactly what it's like with your parents. I've been paying to learn. Asia flinched as if he'd slapped her. Then she pivoted, and the tears became anger, because anger is easier when you're losing. So what? She snapped. You're just going to destroy my family because my mom said something rude. Mark's eyebrows lifted slightly. Rude, he repeated. That's what you're calling it. Asia threw her hands up, towel slipping a little. Fine, she said. My mom is harsh. She always has been. But you don't do this. You don't go to authorities, Merrick. That's not what we do. We handle things in the family. Merrick felt the heat rise in his chest, but he kept his voice level. You handled things in the family, he said. You handled me. Asia's face tightened, and she looked past him toward the living room as if she were already planning her next move. Who to call? What story to tell? Merrick watched her mind work the way he'd once admired it, and it made him sick. If you really loved me, she said suddenly, leaning into a new angle, you'd stop this. You'd fix it. You'd call your lawyer and tell them you made a mistake. Merrick shook his head once. No, he said. This is the fix. Asia's nostrils flared. You're being dramatic, she snapped, and Merrick almost smiled because Helena had said the same thing. It was like hearing a song with the same chorus. I'm being careful, Merrick replied. There's a difference. Asia stared at him, and for a moment the room was filled with the sound of her breathing, quick and uneven. Then her phone buzzed on the bed, and she snatched it up like it was a lifeline. Merrick didn't have to guess who it was. He saw the name light up. Mama. Asia answered immediately, pressing the phone to her ear and turning her body half away as if Merrick might steal the words out of it. Mamo, she said, voice urgent. He did something. Merrick did something. Merrick sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on his thighs, listening. He didn't want to listen. He didn't want to be part of their private machinery anymore. But this was the moment where lies began to form, and lies had a way of becoming weapons if you didn't understand their shape. Helena's voice came through, shrill even through the phone speaker. What did he do? Helena demanded. Asia's eyes flicked to Merrick, then away. He sent emails, Asia said quickly. He sent things. He's trying to hurt you. Helena's voice rose. Emails to who? She barked. Asia swallowed. To places, she said, vague, and Merrick could hear the panic because Asia didn't want to say it out loud, as if naming it would make it real. Helena's tone sharpened into pure venom. Put him on, she snapped. Asia hesitated for half a second, then thrust the phone toward Merrick like she was handing him a live wire. Merrick took it. Helena, he said. There was a brief silence, the kind that happens when someone is surprised their prey has teeth. Then Helena spoke with a sweetness that was almost impressive. Merrick, she purred, cochineal. What is this? Asia is upset. We're all upset. Why are you doing this? Merrick looked at the phone and felt the old reflex again, the conditioning that made you soften when someone called you darling. He crushed it. Because you told me the truth, he said. And now I'm returning the favor. Helena's sweetness cracked. You're overreacting, she snapped. You're emotional. You always were. Mark's mouth tightened. Emotional would have been yelling, he said. Emotional would have been driving to your house and doing something stupid. I didn't do that. Helena inhaled sharply. What did you send? She demanded. Mark's voice stayed even. Documentation, he said. Records. Screenshots. Money transfers. Property records. Income discrepancies. On the other end, there was a small sound, not quite a gasp, more like someone swallowing a stone. Then Helena surged back into anger. "How dare you," she hissed. "After everything we did for you." Marek's eyes slid to Asia, who stood with her arms crossed, jaw clenched, as if she were watching a negotiation. Merrick spoke slowly, each word placed like screw. "Everything you did," he repeated. "You mean the part where you call me a wallet? Or the part where you planned to throw me away after a promotion?" Helena's voice became sharp with contempt. "You don't understand family," she said. "You don't understand sacrifice." Merrick let out one breath through his nose, almost a laugh. "I understand sacrifice," he said. "I've been paying for it. $1,200 a month. 3 years." Helena's tone changed again, faster this time, pivoting to a different weapon, shame. "Men like you," she said, "you think money is love. You throw money and you want worship. We never asked you." Merrick cut her off. "You did ask," he said. "Every month. Sometimes twice." Helena's voice rose. "Asia asked," she said. "Our daughter. Because she loves us." Marek's gaze stayed on Asia's face. "And she told you I'd keep paying?" he said. "So you didn't have to ask, did you? You just had to expect." Helena went quiet for a beat, then said, colder than before, "Stop this, Merrick. If you love Asia, you stop." Merrick felt something harden behind his ribs, a clean line he couldn't cross back over. "Don't use her name like that," he said. "You don't get to threaten my love for her when you were planning to use it." Helena exhaled, and her voice dropped into a low, dangerous calm. "You think you're smart," she said. "You think you will win. But you're making enemies." Marek's mouth tightened. "I didn't make you my enemy," he said. "You chose that when you decided I wasn't family." Helena's anger flared again. "You are nothing," she spat, and the words sounded familiar because Merrick had heard them already, and this time they didn't hurt as much because pain loses power when it becomes predictable. Merrick replied quietly, "Then it shouldn't matter when I stop paying." He ended the call and handed the phone back to Asia without drama, like returning a tool to a shelf. Asia stared at him, and her voice came out small, almost childlike. "You just made my mother hate you," she said. Merrick nodded once. "She already did," he said. Asia's face twisted. "You're going to regret this," she whispered, and Merrick felt a flash of something. Not fear, but the recognition that threats were now part of the air in their home. "Maybe," he said, "but not as much as I regret trusting you." Asia flinched again, and then she turned and walked out of the bedroom with stiff steps, like she was holding herself upright with pure will. Merrick stayed on the bed, staring at the spot where she'd been standing. For a moment, he wanted to chase her, not to apologize, but to demand the truth out loud, to force her to say it in the room with him, to make it real in the air between them. But Marianne's voice returned in his head. Clean, defensible, no scenes. Merrick stood and went to the kitchen, where the birthday food sat cooling into disappointment. The Big O smelled too strong now. The cake looked ridiculous. Merrick opened the fridge, found a plastic container, and began packing the food away with slow, careful movements, because if he didn't keep his hands busy, his mind would start tearing him apart. He heard Asia moving in the living room, drawers opening, the closet door sliding, the faint thud of a suitcase dragged out. He didn't stop her. He didn't ask where she was going. He waited. After 10 minutes, Asia appeared in the kitchen doorway dressed in jeans and a hoodie, hair still damp, suitcase behind her. Her face was composed in a way that wasn't strength. It was rehearsal. "I'm going to my parents," she said. Merrick kept packing food. "Okay," he replied. Asia stared at him as if she'd expected him to beg. "You're not going to stop me," she said, tone sharp, trying to provoke something. Merrick capped the container, wiped the rim, and placed it in the fridge. Then he looked at her. "You've already left," he said. "I'm just catching up." Asia's eyes flashed. "You're acting like I'm a villain," she snapped. Marek's voice stayed calm. "You are," he said, and he saw the impact of that simple sentence, the way it hit her ego harder than any shouting could. She pulled the suitcase handle up and rolled it toward the door. "Don't call me," she said over her shoulder. Merrick didn't answer. He listened to the door open, the hallway air rush in, the door close with a soft final click. The apartment went still, and Merrick realized he was alone in a way he hadn't been since he put a ring on her finger. He stood there for a long time, hand resting on the fridge door, staring at nothing. Then his own phone buzzed. A new email notification. Not from an agency, not a response, just Marianne, short and direct. We proceed as planned. Do not engage. Document everything. Call me in the morning. Merrick replied with one word. Okay. He set his phone down and looked around his kitchen. The life he'd built with Asia still sitting in place like it didn't know it was over. He forced himself to do something mundane. He took out the trash. He washed the dishes. He wiped the counter. Each action was a step away from panic. When the work was done, he sat at the table and opened Tomas's spreadsheet again, the one with the total that made his stomach knot. $43,200. $43,200 of being helpful. Merrick stared at the number until it stopped looking like math and started looking like time, like the hours of overtime, like the weekends he'd missed, like the nights he'd driven home too tired to speak. His phone buzzed again, this time a text from an unknown number. Merrick opened it. The message was short, and it made his blood go cold because it wasn't Helena's voice and it wasn't Asia's. It was Stasik's, blunt and heavy. You think you can embarrass my family? You will learn. Merrick stared at the words, then took a screenshot and forwarded it to Marianne without replying. 2 minutes later, another text arrived from the same number. You owe us. You married into us. You don't walk away. Merrick didn't respond. He took another screenshot, forwarded it. He set his phone face down on the table and sat there listening to his own breathing, slow and controlled. And he realized this was the part where his old life would have tried to fix things with apologies and compromise, where he would have tried to smooth it over so everyone could pretend tomorrow would look like yesterday. But tomorrow wouldn't look like yesterday. Tomorrow would look like consequences. He didn't know yet how fast they would come or how ugly, but he knew the machine was moving now, and machines don't stop just because someone starts crying. Merrick stood, went to his closet, and pulled out the small lockbox where he kept his passport and birth certificate, the practical items you never think about until you need them. He added his union documents. He added his pay stubs. He added the folder, the brick, and he placed it all in the trunk of his car, even though it was late, even though the air outside was sharp and cold, because Marianne had told him to protect himself, and Merrick took instructions seriously when they came from someone who understood the rules. When he came back upstairs, the apartment felt emptier, and the silence felt like a test. He sat at the table again and waited, not for Asia, not for Helena, but for the first sign that the world had received what he'd sent. Just after midnight, his email pinged again, and this time it wasn't Marianne. It was an automated acknowledgement from one of the offices he'd contacted, a bland confirmation that his submission had been received and would be reviewed. Merrick read it twice. The language was cold, bureaucratic, almost polite, and yet it made his chest tighten with a strange relief, like hearing a lock click into place. He leaned back in his chair, closed his eyes for a moment, and let the exhaustion finally surge up, heavy and late. Then his phone rang. Unknown number. Merrick hesitated, then answered. Hello, he said. A man's voice came through, professional and clipped. Mr. Novak, the voice said, and Merrick sat up straighter. This is regarding a report you submitted. I need to ask you a few questions. Mark's mouth went dry. Okay, he said. The voice continued. First, I need you to confirm the identities of the individuals involved and the nature of the financial support you provided. Specifically, you stated you transferred $1,200 monthly for approximately 3 years. Is that accurate? Mark's pulse beat steadily in his throat. Yes, he said. That's accurate. And you have records, the voice said, not a question. Yes, Merrick replied. Bank statements, transfer confirmations, dates. There was a pause, papers shifting on the other end. Mr. Novak, the voice said, did the individuals ever provide documentation of financial hardship, or were these payments made based on verbal representations? Merrick thought of Helena's dramatic calls, Stasik's groans, Asia's wet eyes. Mostly verbal, he said. Some bills. Nothing consistent. Another pause. Understood, the voice said. I'll be following up. Do not contact the subjects regarding this inquiry. Marek's eyes flicked to the suitcase, tracks still faintly visible on the carpet. "I won't," he said. The call ended. Merrick sat there staring at his phone, the room quiet again, and he realized the first domino had already tipped. Somewhere, Helena and Stasek were still telling themselves they could bully him into silence. Somewhere, Asia was sitting in her parents' house, probably rehearsing a story where Merrick was unstable and cruel, and she was the loyal daughter caught in the middle. Merrick didn't know how long it would take for reality to catch them, but he knew it was coming, and he knew from the cold professionalism of that voice that the process had begun. He got up, locked the door, checked the window latches like he was closing down a job site, and finally lay down in the bed that smelled faintly of Asia's shampoo. He didn't sleep right away. He stared into the dark and listened to the building settle. And in the quiet, he made himself a promise he should have made years earlier. No more begging to be treated like a person. His phone buzzed once more near to him, and when he picked it up, the message on the screen was from Asia, the first since she'd left, and it was only 5 words, but it hit like a shove. "You have no idea, Merrick." Merrick stared at the 5 words on the screen until they stopped looking like language and started looking like a tactic. "You have no idea, Merrick." It wasn't a question. It wasn't an apology. It was a hook, meant to pull him back into the old role, where he chased clarity, chased reassurance, chased the version of his wife who smiled at festivals and corrected his Polish like it mattered. He could almost hear Helena coaching her, could almost see the little tilt of the head that always preceded a new angle. Marek's thumb hovered over the keyboard for a moment, the reflex to answer rising like muscle memory. And then he set the phone face down on a nightstand, as if it were something that might sting if he held it too long. He inhaled slowly and forced his body to unclench, because this wasn't a job site where danger announced itself with sparks. This was the kind of danger that came wrapped in familiar voices, the kind that slid into your bloodstream before you realized you'd been cut. The room smelled faintly of Asia's shampoo and clean sheets, and for a few seconds Merrick felt grief roll through him in a wave so heavy he thought it might press him into the mattress. Then the grief receded, and what was left was the same cold clarity that had carried him through the last 2 weeks. He rolled onto his side, stared at the dark wall, and told himself, again, do not engage. Document everything. Let the process work. In the morning, he woke up to gray light leaking through the blinds and the dull ache of a body that had slept without rest. He checked his phone and saw 3 missed calls from unknown numbers and 1 voicemail from his mother, short and worried, asking why Asia had called her late last night crying and saying something had happened. Merrick didn't call his mother back immediately. He sat up, swung his feet onto the floor, and let his mind line up priorities the way it always did when he was overwhelmed. First safety, then documentation, then communication. He showered, dressed, and before he left the apartment, he walked through each room slowly, noticing what was missing. Asia's toothbrush, her makeup bag, the blue scarf she always wore when it was windy. The absence felt like a dent in the air. On the kitchen counter, a single envelope sat that hadn't been there the night before. Merrick stared at it, suspicious, then picked it up carefully. It was from Helena. No stamp. Hand-delivered. The handwriting was sharp and slanted, the kind of script that looked aggressive even when it wrote something kind. Merrick set it back down and took a photo of it where it sat. Then he slid it into a clear plastic sleeve from his work folder and placed it with a brick. He didn't open it yet. He wanted Marianne to see it first. He drove to work on autopilot, the city passing like scenery from a life he used to be in, and he parked, sat for a moment with his hands on the steering wheel, and reminded himself that he was not going to be the man they could provoke into mistakes. At lunch, he called Marianne. She answered on the second ring. "You got contact," she said, not a question. Merrick exhaled. Stasek texted threats, he said. Asia texted bait. Helena left a letter at my door. Marianne's voice stayed calm. Screenshot everything. Do not respond. Bring the letter to my office tonight. And call your mother back with minimal details. Someone will try to control the narrative. Don't let it be them. Merrick nodded, even though she couldn't see him. Okay, he said. Also, Marianne added, if anyone shows up at your apartment, do not open the door. If they refuse to leave, you call the police. You're not escalating. You're documenting. Merrick felt his jaw tighten. They'll say I'm calling the police on family, he murmured. Marian didn't hesitate. They said you weren't family, she replied. Remember? Merrick swallowed and felt the truth settle like weight in his stomach. Yeah, he said. I remember. After he hung up, he called his mother. She answered immediately, breathless. Merrick, what is going on? She demanded, her Polish accent thick with worry. Asia called me crying. She said you were doing something to her parents. She said you're trying to ruin them. Merrick closed his eyes briefly, forcing himself to keep his voice steady. Mama, he said, Asia is not telling you the full story. Then tell me, his mother snapped. Merrick kept it simple. I found out Asia and her parents have been using me for money, he said. They wrote it down. They plan to leave me after her promotion. I have proof. Silence. Then his mother's voice came softer, stunned. No, she said. Asia wouldn't. Merrick swallowed. I wish that was true, he said. His mother made a small, pained sound. She was always polite, she whispered, as if politeness were evidence of goodness. Merrick stared at the break room wall. Polite isn't loyal, he said. His mother exhaled shakily. Come over tonight, she said. Eat. Talk. Merrick hesitated. He wanted the comfort, but he didn't want his mother dragged into the blast radius. Soon, he said carefully. I have a lawyer appointment. I just needed you to hear it from me, not from them. His mother was quiet for a long moment, then said, If they come to me, I will not listen. Merrick's throat tightened. Thank you, he managed. When he returned to work, his foreman called him aside. You okay? The man asked, eyes scanning Merrick's face like he was looking for cracks. Merrick nodded. Personal stuff, he said. I can work. The foreman studied him. You're solid, he said finally. Just don't do anything stupid. Merrick almost laughed at the irony. I won't, he said. But the day didn't stay quiet. At 3 p.m., his phone buzzed with a notification from his building security app. Someone was at the lobby intercom. Merrick opened the camera feed and felt his stomach drop. Helena stood there in a long black coat. Hair perfect, lips pursed as if she were attending a funeral she disapproved of. Stasek was beside her, shoulders squared, face hard. Asia stood a step behind them, arms folded, expression unreadable. Merrick watched them for a full 10 seconds, taking in their posture, their certainty, the way they looked like they belonged there. Then he hit the ignore option and saved the video clip. The intercom rang again, then again. Merrick didn't answer. He texted his downstairs neighbor, a retired guy named Frank who'd once asked Merrick to fix a light switch and then insisted on paying him in homemade cookies. Merrick wrote, If you see 3 people at the lobby causing trouble, please don't open the door. Thanks. Frank replied immediately, Got it. They ring again. Merrick watched the feed. Helena leaned toward the intercom camera and spoke, but the audio didn't come through clearly. Stasek's mouth moved in sharp bursts. Asia stood still, eyes scanning, waiting. Merrick felt a flicker of anger. Not explosive, just bright because even now they assumed access. They assumed his home belonged to them. After 5 minutes, Helena pulled out her phone and began texting. Merrick's phone buzzed a second later. A message from Asia. Open the door. We need to talk like adults. Merrick stared at the screen. Talk like adults. After 3 years of treating him like a resource. After planning a divorce like a business transaction, Merrick didn't respond. Another message. If you don't open it, my dad will make a scene. Merrick saved it. Another. You're making this worse. Merrick forwarded the screenshots to Marianne and turned the phone over. On the camera feed, Helena stepped back and looked up at the stairwell door as if she were considering forcing her way in. Stasek leaned toward Frank's apartment door and knocked. Frank didn't answer. Merrick watched Stasek's jaw clench. Helena's eyes narrowed. Then Stasek turned toward the camera and lifted one hand, palm up, in a gesture that said, See what we have to deal with. Merrick felt his teeth grind. He wasn't going to let them pull him into the hallway like a public trial. He opened the building management portal and sent a quick message to the property manager. 3 individuals are trespassing and harassing residents at lobby intercom. Please review security footage and address immediately. He didn't mention names. He didn't plead. He reported. 10 minutes later, The property manager replied, "Understood." Calling security. Merrick watched the feed until a uniformed security guard appeared in the lobby. Helena immediately transformed, posture softening, hands fluttering in a performance of distress. Stasek began pointing, animated, talking fast. Asia stepped forward, calm, like the reasonable one. Merrick could almost predict the script. They'd say he was confused. They'd say he was having a breakdown. They'd say they were worried about him. They'd say he needed help. The guard listened, nodded, then gestured toward the exit. Helena's face tightened with indignation. She said something sharp. The guard posture stayed firm. A minute later, all three were escorted out. Merrick exhaled slowly, the tension easing only slightly because he knew they weren't done. That evening, Merrick went straight to Marianne's office with the letter in its plastic sleeve. Marianne took it with gloved hands like it was contaminated, opened it carefully, and read. Merrick watched her eyes move across the page. Her expression didn't change much until the last line, where her lips pressed into a thin line. She set the letter down and looked at Merrick. "They're threatening you with public humiliation," she said. "They're trying to paint you as unstable, and they're offering a deal." Merrick frowned. "A deal?" Marianne tapped the paper. "Helena wants you to sign something," she said. "A family repayment agreement claiming your support was a loan to them and they'll repay it in small installments. But the real purpose is to reframe everything so they can claim you made voluntary gifts or that you owed them, and to get your signature on a document they can twist." Marek's skin crawled. "I didn't sign anything," he said. Marianne nodded. "Good. You don't sign anything from them. Ever." Merrick swallowed. "What about the threats?" he asked. Marianne slid her phone toward him. She'd already typed something up. "We file for an order of protection if needed," she said. "But first we wait and document. If they escalate, we respond." Marek's hands clenched and unclenched once. "They came to my building today," he said. "Security removed them." Marianne's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Good," she said. "That's a record." She leaned back. "Now," she said, "here's what you need to be ready for. They'll try 3 things. 1. Intimidation. 2. Emotional manipulation through your mother and friends. 3. Financial counterclaims." Marek's jaw tightened. "Counterclaims?" Marianne nodded. "They'll claim you promised support. They'll claim you're retaliating. They'll claim you're abusive. People like this don't admit wrongdoing. They create fog." Merrick stared at the letter again. Fog. That was exactly what it felt like they wanted the truth to become slippery. Marianne continued. "Your strength is documentation. You have records. You have messages. You have the money trail. And you did not confront them in a way they can dramatize. That matters." Merrick exhaled slowly. "When will we know if anything happens?" he asked, meaning the investigations, the consequences, the dominoes. Marianne gave him a look that was both practical and blunt. "Sooner than they think," she said. "And slower than you want." Merrick nodded. He could live with that. He'd worked jobs where you pulled cable for hours and nothing seemed to change, and then suddenly the whole building lit up because the last connection was made. He knew processes. He knew patience. What he didn't know was how it would feel when Asia finally stopped texting like a person and started texting like an enemy. That night, back in his apartment, he found a new envelope shoved under his door. This one wasn't from Helena. It was from Asia. It was a printed screenshot of a photo of Merrick at their wedding, smiling, with the caption typed underneath, "This is what you're destroying." Merrick stared at it for a long time, then took a photo for documentation, then ripped it cleanly in half and threw it away, because if he kept it, it would become a shrine to a lie. His phone buzzed again. "Asia, you're going to lose everything over this." Merrick didn't respond. "Asia, my parents have friends. My dad knows people." Merrick didn't respond. "Asia, just stop and we can talk." Merrick didn't respond. Then, a new message arrived from an unknown number, and Marek's stomach tightened because the words were too polished to be Stasek's. It read, "Mr. Novak, we represent the Kowalski family. Your actions constitute harassment and defamation. Cease immediately, or we will pursue legal remedies." Merrick stared at the text, then screenshot it and sent it to Marianne. 5 minutes later, Marianne replied, "Do not respond. Forward number. Likely bluff. Good for our record." Merrick sat back, the apartment quiet, and he felt something change again, smaller than a domino, but still a shift. The machine was no longer just government process. It was now a legal chessboard, and Merrick understood chess. His father had taught him as a kid with a cheap plastic set at the kitchen table, explaining that you didn't win by charging. You won by seeing ahead. Merrick rose, walked to the window, and looked down at the street where headlights streamed past like restless insects. Somewhere out there, Asia was telling herself she could still control the story. Somewhere, Helena was calling cousins, spinning outrage into sympathy. Somewhere, Stasek was pacing, furious that his threats hadn't worked. Merrick didn't know which domino would fall next, but he knew one thing with certainty. The moment he responded emotionally, they would grab it and use it. So he didn't. He went to bed, phone on silent, and in the dark he repeated the only rule that mattered now. Clean, defensible, documented. Merrick woke before his alarm because his body had learned to expect impact, the same way you learn to brace when you're walking on ice. The apartment was still dark and quiet, but his mind was already running through the day like a checklist, and the first thing he did was check the lock, then the window latches, then his phone, not because he wanted to, but because he needed to know what kind of weather he was walking into. There were no new messages, which almost made him more uneasy, because silence from people like Helena and Stasek usually meant regrouping, and Asia had proven she could weaponize calm just as easily as chaos. He dressed, made coffee he barely tasted, and as he poured it into a travel mug, he noticed his hands weren't shaking, which was the part he couldn't explain himself, because grief should have made him unsteady. But instead, he felt like he was in the middle of a complicated electrical repair where one wrong move could arc and burn you. And focus was the only safe thing. On his way out, he looked at the empty space by the door where Asia's shoes used to be and felt a hard pulse of anger. Not at the missing shoes, but at the fact that her absence made the apartment feel cleaner, like the air could finally move, and that thought brought guilt with it, because it meant some part of him had been suffocating for years without admitting it. At the job site, he kept his head down and worked, measuring, stripping, routing cable, doing the kind of work that required presence. And for hours, he could almost forget the messages and the threats because copper and conduit don't lie to you. But around mid-morning, his foreman waved him over with that careful look people get when they're about to tell you something personal has leaked into a professional space. Your wife called. The foreman said, not accusatory, just flat like reporting rain. Marek's stomach tightened. Ex-wife. Merrick corrected automatically, and the word felt both too early and too accurate. The foreman's eyebrows lifted slightly, and he scratched his jaw. She said, you're having some kind of crisis, he said, choosing his words. She asked if we should be worried about you around live work. Merrick felt a flash of heat climb his neck, then a colder realization. This was the fog Marion warned him about. The move where they painted him unstable so his credibility would soften before anyone even heard his facts. He forced his voice to stay even. I'm not having a crisis, he said. I'm being harassed. The foreman studied him the way you study a ladder before climbing it. You want to tell me what's going on? He asked. Merrick didn't want to give details that could ricochet, but he couldn't let Asia's version be the only one in circulation. He nodded once. She and her parents were using me for money, he said. I have proof. I hired a lawyer. Now they're trying to intimidate me and smear me. The foreman exhaled slowly. You got paperwork, he asked. Half joking, but not really. Merrick almost smiled because in his world paperwork was the only thing that counted. I do, he said. The foreman nodded. Then keep it tight, he said. I know you, Merrick. You're solid. Just don't bring drama here. Marek's jaw set. I won't, he said. And he meant it. Still, the call told him something important. Asia had already escalated into his livelihood, which meant he had to preempt further attempts. At lunch, he stepped away, called Mary Ann, and told her about the foreman. Mary Ann's response was immediate and crisp. Send me the name of the foreman and the company HR contact if they have one. We may send a notice that you are being harassed and that defamatory statements are being made. You keep working and you do not react in writing to Asia. Merrick gave her the information, then called his union hall and spoke to the business manager, not asking for protection, just placing a marker, a quiet record, that if anything came up, the first story. wasn't going to be Helena's. The manager listened, made a sound like a grunt of approval, and said, "You keep your nose clean and your receipts organized. That's how you win." Merrick returned to the job with a strange steadiness, because each small protective step was like adding insulation, and insulation is what keeps you from getting shocked. By mid-afternoon, his phone buzzed with a new email notification from Marianne. She'd filed a formal request with his building management for the security footage of the lobby incident, and she wanted him to write down in plain factual language what happened and when, including the exact timestamps from the intercom rings and the security guard's escort, because facts written down close to an event carry weight. Merrick did it immediately on his break, not dramatic, not emotional, just 3:07 p.m. Lobby intercom ring, 3:09 p.m. Second ring, 3:15 p.m. Asia texted, "Open the door," 3:18 p.m. Helena attempted to access stairwell, 3:27 p.m. Security arrived, 3:32 p.m. Subject escorted out. He took screenshots of the text messages and attached them to a single email to Marianne. Subject line: lobby incident documentation. When he returned home that night, he found his mailbox stuffed with glossy flyers, which would have been normal except they were all addressed to him and all advertised debt consolidation, bankruptcy help, foreclosure rescue, and men's crisis counseling, the kind of junk mail that doesn't just randomly appear in a pile unless someone has been filling out forms with your name and address. Merrick stood in the hallway staring at the envelopes, and he felt a cold, clean anger take hold because it was petty, stupid sabotage meant to rattle him, meant to make him feel watched, meant to make him feel contaminated in his own building. He took photos of the pile, gathered everything, and carried it upstairs without opening it. Because the point wasn't what the flyers said, the point was the pattern. Inside the apartment, he set the mail on the table and let himself stand still for a moment, listening for any sound outside his door, any footsteps, any whisper. Nothing. The quiet felt like a trap. His phone buzzed again, and this time it was his mother. "Asia came here," followed by another message 2 seconds later. "I told her to leave." And then she cried and said, "You're trying to ruin her parents." And then, "Call me when you can." Merrick felt his throat tighten, not because Asia had shown up, but because she had crossed into his mother's home, which was supposed to be sacred ground, and he hated that his mother had to stand in a doorway and defend herself against his wife's performance. He called immediately. His mother answered breathless. "She came with your mother-in-law," she said, voice shaking with anger. "They stood on my porch like I'm some judge. Helena talked like she owns the neighborhood." Merrick closed his eyes. "Did they threaten you?" he asked. "No," his mother snapped. "They try to make me feel sorry. They try to make you look crazy. Asia said you're spiraling. Can you imagine?" Marek's jaw clenched. "Mama," he said gently, "if they come again, don't open the door. Call me or call the police. Don't argue." His mother made a sharp sound. "I told her I raised you better than to be used," she said, and Merrick felt a small, fierce warmth in his chest. "I told her if she wrote you down as a wallet, then she should stop spending." There was a pause, and his mother's voice softened. "Are you okay?" she asked. Merrick stared at the stack of predatory flyers on his table. "I'm steady," he said. "I'm just angry." His mother exhaled slowly. "Angry is fine," she said. "Stupid is not." "Don't be stupid." Merrick almost smiled. "I won't," he said. After he hung up, he forwarded his mother's account to Marianne in a brief email, and Marianne responded with one line that made Marek's spine straighten. "This is harassment. We will document a pattern." The next morning, the pattern got louder. He opened his email to find a message from a compliance officer at Asia's company requesting a phone interview regarding information submitted to the hotline, and Marek's mouth went dry because this was one of the dominoes he'd set in motion, and now it was here, real, involving other people who didn't care about emotion, only risk. He scheduled the call for his lunch break and warned Marianne. Marianne told him to stick to facts and not speculate. And two, let them ask the questions, not to volunteer extra narrative. On the call, the compliance officer spoke in the careful tone of someone used to hearing lies. "Mr. Novak," she said, "we're looking into reimbursement irregularities and potential conflicts of interest. You submitted documentation suggesting Ms. Kowalska-Novak." She mispronounced and then corrected herself. MS. Kowalski-Novak may have used company funds inappropriately. Can you clarify what you personally observed? Merrick kept his voice neutral. I observed bank transfers and reimbursements that overlapped, he said. I'm not insider systems. I provided screenshots of her messages and the bank statements showing dates and amounts. Did you have access to her company accounts? The officer asked. No, Merrick said. Did you intercept communications? She asked. Merrick hesitated for half a second, then answered honestly because honesty was his only shield. I accessed a message thread on her phone after seeing a preview that indicated I was being financially exploited. The officer was silent, then said, Understood. We will focus on the financial documentation you provided. Merrick exhaled slowly. The officer asked several more questions about dates, about the regular $1,200 transfers, about whether Asia had ever told him the money was for specific bills, and Merrick answered precisely. Then the officer said, Thank you. You may be contacted again, and the call ended. Merrick sat in his truck during lunch staring at the steering wheel, and he felt an unexpected heaviness, because even though he knew he was doing the right thing, there was still a grief to seeing strangers dissect the private mess of his marriage like it was inventory. His phone buzzed, and the message was from Asia, short and sweet like a blade hidden in a smile. I hope you're proud of yourself. Merrick didn't respond. He screenshot it, filed it, and went back to work. That evening, the certified letter arrived at his apartment, and the return address made his stomach tighten. A law office. The letter was not from a real attorney representing Helena and Stasek. Marianne confirmed within minutes after he sent her a photo that it was a demand written in vague, threatening language with no case number and no proper filing. The kind of paper people buy to scare you into backing down. It's intimidation, Marianne told him on the phone. They want you to panic and contact them directly. You will not. Merrick stared at the letter and realized something. Helena and Stasek were spending money now, not to survive, but to fight, which meant they were never as broke as they claimed. The thought fueled his anger into a steadier resolve. The next escalation came 2 days later when Marek's building manager called to say that someone had reported domestic disturbances from his unit and asked if everything was okay. Marek's jaw tightened. He kept his voice calm. No disturbances, he said. My wife moved out. I'm being harassed. Can you put that report in writing and add it to the security log? The manager hesitated, then agreed. Merrick immediately emailed Marianne. False report to building. Request log, Marianne replied. Good. Pattern continues. That night, Merrick came home to find a handwritten note taped to his door. Not in an envelope, just paper flapping. Slightly in the hallway draft like someone wanted the entire floor to see it. It said in thick marker, Pay back what you stole. Merrick stood very still. He didn't rip it down immediately. He took photos from multiple angles that showed the apartment number, the hallway, the tape, the handwriting. Then he carefully removed it, placed it in a plastic sleeve, and sent the photos to Marianne. His phone rang 10 minutes later. It was Marianne. We're done waiting, she said. Tomorrow we file for a protective order based on harassment and intimidation. It doesn't mean anyone goes to jail. It means the court tells them to stop contacting you and stop coming to your home. It creates teeth. Marek's chest tightened with relief and dread. Okay, he said. Also, Marianne added, we file for divorce now. You are no longer delaying. Timing is now defensible. They've escalated. Merrick stared at the empty space in his hallway where the note had been. Okay, he said again, and it felt like stepping on his solid ground. The next day, he sat in Marianne's office while she typed, her fingers moving fast, and he watched her turn his life into legal language. Petitioner seeks relief from harassment, including repeated unwanted contact, threats, trespass, false reporting, and intimidation. He signed where she indicated, not because he enjoyed the idea of court, but because he understood systems. And systems only protect you when you use them properly. When he left her office, his phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number, and this time the tone was different, frantic, stripped of performance. Merrick, please call me. It's urgent. It was Helena's number. Marek's skin prickled. He didn't respond. He forwarded it to Marianne. Then another message came, and this one made Marek's breath stop for a second. They froze my account. Merrick stared at the words until they blurred because there it was, one of the first true consequences. Not a threat, not a smear, not a flyer, but a system doing what systems do when you shine light where it doesn't belong. His phone rang immediately after, and this time it was Asia. Merrick let it go to voicemail. Her voicemail came through seconds later, and her voice was raw, not crying, not sweet, but sharp with panic. "What did you do, Merrick? What did you do? My dad is screaming. My mom can't access her money. They said there's an investigation. Are you happy? Are you happy now?" Merrick listened once, saved it, and sat in his car with both hands on the wheel, feeling his heart beat steadily like a metronome. He was not happy. Happiness wasn't the point. The point was that Helena and Stasek had lived for years inside the assumption that nothing touched them, that Marek's generosity was an endless outlet they could plug into, and now the breaker had finally tripped. Merrick drove home, parked, and sat for a long time before going inside because he needed to prepare for the next wave. Bargaining, the moment consequences. Land, people like Helena don't suddenly become accountable. They become desperate, and desperation makes liars creative. He stepped into his apartment, locked the door behind him, and opened his laptop to see the first official notice in his email from the agency, confirming his report was under review and advising him not to contact the subjects. Merrick leaned back in his chair, eyes on the screen, and felt something like relief flicker inside him, small and grim, because the machinery was moving now, and it didn't care about Helena's lipstick or Stasek's bluster or Asia's tears. It cared about records, and Merrick had records. His phone buzzed again, and this time it was his mother, just 2 words. They're yelling. Marek's stomach tightened. He called her immediately. His mother answered with her voice low and tight. "Helena called me," she said. "She's screaming in Polish like I'm the reason her bank is closed. She says you are evil." Merrick closed his eyes, jaw clenched. "What did you say?" he asked. His mother's voice was steady, stubborn. "I said, Helena, you called my son a wallet. Now your wallet is empty. Goodbye." And I hung up. Merrick felt a sharp, unexpected laugh break out of him, more release than humor. His mother snorted. "Do not laugh," she scolded, but her voice softened. "Listen, Merrick," she said, "they will come. Be careful." Merrick's smile faded. "I'm being careful," he said. He hung up and checked his peephole out of habit, half expecting to see Helena's face pressed against the glass like a curse, but the hallway was empty. He sat down, opened a fresh document titled Timeline Continued, and began typing, because this was what he did now. He turned chaos into evidence. And as he typed, his phone buzzed with one more message from Asia. Only this time the words were different. No threat, no shame, just a line that felt like the beginning of a new tactic. "If you drop the reports, I'll sign whatever you want." Merrick stared at Asia's message for a long time. Not because he was tempted, but because it was almost impressive how quickly she slid from threats to bargaining, like flipping pages in a manual Helena had written years ago. And the words "I'll sign whatever you want" weren't remorse. They were an attempt to buy back control before the world finished noticing what the Kowalskis had been doing in the dark. He set the phone down, took a screenshot, forwarded it to Marianne with 2 words, "New tactic." And then he stood up and walked to the sink and ran cold water over his hands the way he used to after a job, when the grime felt like it had soaked into his skin, because what he needed in that moment was something physical and simple to remind his body that he was still in charge of himself. When he picked the phone back up, there were already 2 more messages from Asia, one right after the other. The kind you send when you're panicking and trying to sound reasonable while your world tilts. "Please, my mom is losing it. They can't pay their bills. They're saying you ruined them." Followed by, "If you ever loved me, you'll stop this." Merrick exhaled slowly through his nose and felt that old reflex flare again. Fix it, soothe it, make it calm. And then he remembered the message thread, the emojis, the laughter, the line about him being a wallet with a pulse. And the reflex didn't die with drama. It died with a quiet click, like a switch flipping off. He didn't respond to Asia, because Marianne was right. The moment he engaged emotionally in writing, Asia would grab it and use it. And instead, he opened a new note and typed the date and time and summarized the message. "Asia offers to sign whatever you want if reports dropped," followed by emotional manipulation. He saved it, Then checked his mailbox again because he'd started doing that the way you check your mirrors on the highway when you know someone might be weaving near you. And there, wedged behind a pizza flyer, was an official-looking envelope with a government seal that made his stomach tighten. He opened it carefully, not ripping, not tearing, because he'd learned to treat every piece of paper like it might be evidence. And inside was a notice addressed to Helena Kowalska, with his address listed as a related party contact, informing her that her benefits case was under review and that certain payments were being suspended pending verification. Merrick read it twice, the bureaucratic language cold and impersonal, and the strange thing was he didn't feel triumph. He felt confirmation, the way you feel when a tester finally shows the fault you've been chasing for weeks. His phone rang immediately after, and he saw Helena's name flash on the screen like a flare. He let go to voicemail. A second later, Stasa called. He let it go to voicemail too. Then Asia again. He let it go. Within minutes, his voicemail box filled with overlapping voices, Helena shrieking in Polish, Stasek barking in English, Asia crying and then snapping. And Merrick didn't listen right away because he knew the first instinct would be to absorb their panic, to carry it like he'd carried everything else. And he refused to do that one more time. He forwarded the call's timestamps to Marianne and then went for a walk around the block, cold air biting at his face, Chicago wind cutting between buildings like it always did. And he kept walking until his heart rate steadied and the tightness in his chest loosened enough that he could think clearly. When he came back upstairs, there was a folded piece of paper wedged under his door again. And for a moment, he just stared at it because the childishness of it made him angry in a different way. The way you get angry when someone keeps poking a bruise and acting like it's funny. He took photos, then opened it. The note was in Helena's handwriting, jagged and furious. "We will tell everyone what you did. You will be shamed in the community." Merrick read it once, then again, then set it down and felt a calm settle over him. Because the threat of shame only works when you still care about the opinion of people who would believe liars without asking for proof. He texted the building manager a short message. "Someone is slipping harassing notes under my door again. Please add to security log." Then he typed a single email to Marianne. Harassment note escalated. Benefit suspension notice received, copy attached. Voicemails incoming. Marianne replied within 10 minutes. "Good. Tomorrow we file. Tonight you rest. Do not engage." Merrick didn't know how to rest. Not really. Not with his phone buzzing and his marriage burning down in real time. But he did the only kind of rest he understood. He prepared. He printed the screenshots of Asia's messages, printed the benefits notice, printed the building manager's confirmation, and he placed everything in chronological order in the brick folder because the world could be chaotic, but paper could be neat, and neat paper was power. He slept a little, woke up before dawn too. Another buzzing phone, and when he checked it, there was a single message from Asia that sounded different, quieter, and that difference was what scared him. "Merrick, I'm coming by. I'm alone. Please." Merrick didn't answer. He took the screenshot, forwarded it, and then he followed Marianne's instructions and did not open the door for anyone, not even for a wife who wanted to perform regret in his hallway. At 9 a.m., he was back in Marianne's office, and she moved fast because when harassment turns into a pattern, you don't negotiate with it. You contain it. She drafted the protective order request, listing the dates, the lobby incident, the threatening texts, the false reports, the notes. Under his door, and she attached the screenshots and the security footage request and the printed harassment notes as exhibits. And Merrick watched her turn his last few weeks into something the court could understand without needing to like him. Because courts don't require charm, they require documentation. He signed where she pointed. And when he asked, "Will they see this as me attacking family?" Marianne didn't even look up from her keyboard when she said, "The court will see it as you. Protecting yourself from people who won't stop." And then she slid another stack of papers across the desk. The divorce filing. Merrick stared at the word petitioner and felt his throat tighten, because even now a part of him wanted Asia to wake up and come back as the person he thought he married. But that person had been either an illusion or a performance. And either way, it was gone. He signed the divorce papers with a steadier hand than he expected, because grief doesn't always make you weak. Sometimes it makes you precise. By the time he left Marianne's office, Asia had already been served electronically through her counsel. Yes, counsel, because of course Helena had scrambled to find someone to posture on official letterhead. And within an hour, Marek's phone buzzed with a new message from Asia that was less polished than the earlier threats, more raw, more honest in a way that didn't excuse it. You really filed. Merrick didn't respond. The next message came 5 minutes later. My mom says she'll ruin you. Then, she's calling everyone. Then, please tell your lawyer we'll sign. Merrick forwarded it all and kept driving, because he'd learned something in the last month that he wished he'd learned sooner. The more you argue with liars, the more oxygen you give their story. The only way to win was to starve the story and feed the facts. The first court date for the protective order was set quickly because the harassment was documented, and when Merrick walked into the courthouse, he felt strangely calm. The same calm he felt when stepping onto a lift to fix a live panel. You don't think about fear. You think about procedure. Helena was there with Stasek, dressed in black like she was attending a funeral and also planning one. Lips tight, eyes hard, clutching a rosary as if it gave her authority. Asia sat a row behind them, shoulders tense, face pale, and when her eyes met Marek's, he saw something flicker there that might have been regret, but even regret can be a tactic. And Merrick didn't trust flickers anymore. Marianne stood beside him in a navy suit and spoke. In clean, factual sentences, and when the judge asked Merrick questions, he answered with dates and records, not feelings, and Helena tried to interrupt twice, raising her voice, claiming Merrick was cruel, claiming he promised to support them, claiming he was retaliating because he was unstable, and the judge cut her off with a look that said, "Not here, not like that." When Stasek tried to lean forward and mutter something under his breath, the bailiff took a step closer, and Stasek sat back. Like a boy who'd been caught, the judge reviewed the exhibits, the screenshots, the lobby footage summary, the pattern of unwanted contact, and then the judge granted a temporary protective order. No contact, no coming to Marek's residence, no harassment through third parties, no social media campaigns directed at him. And for the first time in years, Merrick felt his shoulders drop, because a boundary had finally been placed somewhere outside his own willpower, a boundary with consequences. Helena's face twisted with fury, and she hissed something in Polish that Merrick didn't need to translate to understand, while Asia stared at the floor like she didn't recognize the mess she'd helped create. Outside the courtroom, Asia approached him in the hallway like she was walking toward a ledge, slow, uncertain, and Marianne stepped slightly between them, not blocking, just reminding Asia that the old access was gone. "You got what you wanted," Asia said, voice tight. Merrick stared at her for a long moment and realized he didn't know who she was without the performance, without her parents' orbit, without the money in the plan. "No," he said quietly. "I got what I needed." Asia swallowed. "They're going to lose everything," she whispered, and Merrick could hear the fear underneath. Not just for her parents, but for herself, for her identity as the good daughter, for the way the community would now look at the Kowalskis. Marek's voice stayed calm. "They should have thought about that before they made me their plan," he said. Asia's eyes filled, and for a second she looked like the woman from the festival again. The one who laughed and teased him and made him feel chosen. And Merrick felt a sharp pain in his chest because he had loved that woman deeply, and he had been willing to work himself into the ground for her. Then Asia's face hardened, the mask slipping back into place. "If you drop the reports," she said, voice low, "we'll sign the divorce however you want." Marianne spoke before Merrick could, her tone polite and lethal. "The reports aren't negotiable. The divorce terms are." Asia blinked, as if she hadn't expected the world to have rules she couldn't bend. "Fine," Asia whispered, and then she turned and walked away, shoulders hunched, like she was going back to a house full of screaming and blame. Over the next month, the consequences rolled in steadily, not dramatically, but relentlessly, like water filling a hole. Helena's benefits were formally suspended pending investigation. Stasek received notices about unreported rental income. Bank accounts stayed locked, down long enough that their bills stacked, and the friends Stasek claimed to have didn't show up with money. Because people who brag about knowing people usually only know people when things are going well. Asia's company completed its compliance review and terminated her for reimbursement abuse and dishonesty. And that was the point where Asia stopped texting entirely. Because once the professional consequences hit, there was no version of the story where she could be the victim without looking like an accomplice. The divorce moved faster than Merrick expected because the evidence was clean and Asia's side knew it. And in mediation, Asia's attorney tried to frame the $1,200 a month as mutual family support. But Marianne slid the screenshots across the table without raising her voice, and the room went quiet in the way rooms go quiet when everyone realizes the game is over. Merrick kept the apartment, kept his retirement, kept his paychecks protected, and Asia walked away with what she came in with and no claim to the money he had earned while she laughed with her parents about keeping him calm. The final paperwork was signed on a rainy Thursday, and when Merrick stepped out of the courthouse with the decree in his hand, he didn't feel victorious. He felt light, like someone had finally removed a weight he'd been carrying so long he thought it was part of his skeleton. Weeks later, he heard through the community grapevine, the same one Helena had threatened to weaponize, that the Kowalskis had listed their house, that Stasik's back had magically improved enough to handle emergency repairs for a sale, that Helena was calling relatives asking for temporary help. And Merrick didn't gloat because gloating would have tied him to them again, and he was done being tied. The last time Asia contacted him was through a single email sent from a new address, short, stripped of performance. And for the first time, it sounded almost human. "I'm sorry I let them turn me into someone I don't recognize. I hope you find peace." Merrick read it once, felt the familiar ache, and then he filed it away with everything else, because an apology that arrives after consequences is still an apology, but it doesn't rewrite the years he didn't reply. Instead, he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He took a Saturday off without guilt, walked to a little Polish bakery on Milwaukee Avenue, bought a warm poppy seed roll, sat by the window, and watched people move through the day with their own problems and their own joys. And he realized the world didn't end when you stop funding someone else's fantasy of entitlement. It just gets quieter, and in that quiet, you can finally hear yourself think. Merrick went home, locked his door, looked around his apartment, and for the first time in 3 years, there was no countdown to the next transfer, no dread of the next guilt call, no pressure to prove he was good by bleeding. He stood in the center of his living room and felt something close to relief settle into his bones, and he understood, with a clarity so sharp it almost hurt, that he hadn't destroyed anyone. He had simply stepped away and let them carry their own weight. And the moment he stopped holding them up, they fell exactly as far as their own choices allowed. And if anyone ever asked him what the turning point was, he knew the answer would be simple. It was the day they didn't show up for his birthday and told him he meant nothing. Because once someone says you're not family, you're finally free to believe them. And once you believe them, you can stop paying for the privilege of being used, you can stop begging to be respected, and you can start building a life where the only people who get access to your generosity are the ones who would never call it useful behind your back. And that night, when Merrick turned off the lights and the apartment went dark, the silence didn't feel like a trap anymore. It felt like peace. And if you're listening and you've ever been treated like a resource instead of a person, let this be your reminder. Keep your receipts, protect your peace, and don't confuse manipulation for love. And if you want more stories where the truth wins without shouting, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments, what would have been your breaking point, the first transfer or the birthday no-show?